Welcome to the channel. Today we're going to touch on one of the deepest, most complex, and at the same time most unsettling questions a human being can ask. What is consciousness, and does it disappear when the body dies? Let's make an important and honest clarification right away. Official science does not claim that the immortality of consciousness has been definitively and conclusively proven. However, more and more scientists, researchers, and philosophers of science acknowledge that the classical model, according to which consciousness is merely a byproduct of brain activity, is facing a serious crisis. That is exactly what we are going to talk about today. Not belief, not religion, and not mysticism, but why in the 21st century the question of the possible continuity of consciousness has once again become a subject of serious scientific discussion. For a long time, science was dominated by a simple and seemingly logical approach. The brain produces consciousness in the same way the liver produces bile. There are neurons, electrical impulses, and chemical reactions, and somehow, from all of this, a subjective sense of I emerges. The problem is that decades of research have failed to show how matter actually generates subjective experience. We can measure brain activity. We can see which regions activate during emotions, thoughts, and memories. But we still cannot explain why inner experience exists at all. Why is there not just reaction, but sensation? Why is there not just information, but an observer? This question is known as the hard problem of consciousness, and to this day it remains unresolved. One of the most inconvenient facts for classical neuroscience is that levels of consciousness do not always correspond to the condition of the brain. There are documented medical cases in which large portions of brain tissue were missing or severely damaged, yet normal thinking, personality, and memory were preserved, and intelligence remained within normal ranges. In particular, there are well-known cases of hydrocephalus in which the volume of functioning brain tissue was dramatically smaller than average, yet the person lived an ordinary intellectual life. These cases do not prove that consciousness exists independently of the brain, but they seriously undermine the idea that consciousness depends strictly and linearly on the number of neurons. Another major area of research involves states in which brain activity is drastically reduced: deep coma, clinical death, anesthesia, and severe trauma. It is precisely in these states that phenomena arise which still lack a clear explanation. In some cases, people later reported detailed awareness of events around them, accurately recalled conversations among medical staff, and described experiences of observing themselves from outside the body. At the same time, medical data indicated that the brain could not have supported complex conscious experience according to the classical model. Science does not yet draw definitive conclusions from this, but the mere existence of such observations is forcing more specialists to reconsider long-held assumptions. Near-death experiences were long dismissed as hallucinations or cultural fantasies. However, as data accumulated, it became clear that these experiences show striking similarities regardless of culture, age, or personal beliefs. People describe heightened clarity of awareness, absence of fear, a sense of leaving the body, and an experience of time outside its usual framework. Scientists do not claim this as proof of life after death, but they increasingly acknowledge that explaining these phenomena solely as the product of a dying brain is extremely difficult. Some contemporary researchers propose that consciousness may not be a derivative phenomenon, but a fundamental property of reality. Within these hypotheses, consciousness is not created by the brain and is not localized in a single point. Instead, the brain may function as an interface or receiver. Much like a screen does not create an image but merely displays a signal. It is important to emphasize that these are hypotheses, not established theories, yet they are taken seriously by physicists, neuroscientists, and philosophers of science because the classical model fails to provide complete explanations. One of the most intriguing ideas suggests that the brain may not produce consciousness, but rather limit or filter it. According to this model, consciousness is originally much broader, and the brain narrows it into a functional state necessary for survival in the physical world. Damage to the brain, in this view, does not destroy consciousness but disrupts how it is expressed. This concept offers a new way to interpret altered states of consciousness, sudden insights, and experiences that transcend the boundaries of ordinary identity. It is not proven, but it fits surprisingly well with a number of observed phenomena. Why, then, is official science so cautious? Because science demands reproducible experiments, precise measurements, and rigorous models. Consciousness, however, is subjective experience, which is extremely difficult to capture with instruments. Moreover, acknowledging consciousness as fundamental would require a revision of the entire materialist worldview, and such shifts happen slowly and often face resistance. The history of science shows that many revolutionary ideas were first ignored or ridiculed before eventually becoming part of the accepted framework. It is also crucial to clearly separate the scientific approach from religious interpretations. When researchers speak about possible continuity of consciousness, they are not referring to heaven, hell, or specific images of an afterlife. The question is different: can the very fact of awareness be independent of the birth and death of the body? If consciousness does not arise from nothing, then it is reasonable to ask, where does it go? If consciousness is not a random byproduct of matter, then life ceases to be merely a biological accident. The fear of death loses its absolute power, and responsibility for one's state of consciousness becomes greater. This does not mean denying the body or physical reality. It means taking a deeper look at who we truly are. In conclusion, it is important to be honest: scientists have not proven the immortality of consciousness in a strict scientific sense. However, they increasingly recognize that existing models fail to explain all observed facts. We live in a time when the question of consciousness has once again become a central scientific challenge. And perhaps the most honest conclusion today is this: we understand far less about the nature of consciousness than we once believed. If this topic resonates with you, if you feel that the familiar picture of reality is beginning to crack, subscribe to the channel. This is only the beginning, and many more questions lie ahead, questions whose answers may change everything.